Think forward. Think Research Channel.
I'd like to welcome you to our next Bioethics Grand Rounds today, January, is it the 11th? 12th. Thank you very much. We are very pleased to have Dr. Bryan Liang join us today. Dr. Liang works down in San Diego at the Institute of Health Loss Studies and also works at the San Diego Center for Patient Safety. Dr. Liang is a medical doctor. He holds a PhD as well and a Doctor of Jurisprudence. So he comes today to address the topic of medical mistakes, error in medicine, and he brings a wealth of both experience and capabilities. But one of the most delightful things about Dr. Liang is he's very personable as well, and he's a pilot. I'm a pilot as well, and so we are all of a sudden kindred spirits. So on times like this, after a fresh rain with a strong wind, our spirit tends to want to soar. So today, let's help Dr. Liang soar. Thank you, Dr. Liang.
Thank you, Mark. Thank all of you for weathering at noon when you're postparentally probably either hyperglycemic and ready to sleep or really hungry and wanting to get out of here. So I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. Thanks very much for this opportunity to speak with you. It's always wonderful to see a group of people who are enthusiastic about bioethics and ethics generally, and personally, it's a labor of love of mine, so thanks very much for your support. Now, in this particular talk, as you can see, it's titled Addressing, first of all, it's unbelievable to see a screen this big. I have never been that big before. The topic is Addressing Medical Errors, Shifting the Professional Paradigm to Promote Patient Safety. As you notice, really clean and crisp. The font and the colors are really rendered well. This is because this presentation is being done and was created on a Macintosh. Yeah, and I noticed many of you have this, so it's good. I know I'm in a group of friendly people. In this particular talk, what I'm going to try to do is a couple of things. First, I'm going to try to present to you some basics on medical error, and that includes kind of the epidemiology of it, as well as some of the areas that are important, such as some of the conclusions, some of the theory behind errors in systems, and then talk about the professional paradigms, namely law and medicine, and how they do or don't contribute to our ability to actually reduce errors, make systems more resilient, and improve safety. Now, importantly, being a pilot really makes a difference because in the world of aviation, aviation knows that human beings are the weak point, and they recognize that, and I think all of us realize that if we just sat and thought about it in a minute. And that particular theme will go throughout this particular talk. All right, let's just get right into it. Medical errors, I think we've all heard a lot about it. Errors, in fact, cause the vast majority of patients' injuries around the world. And this particular fact is a fact. It's been replicated throughout almost every country that studied it, and certainly represented amongst every single continent in the world. Everyone has looked at this topic and found that the vast amount of injury associated with error. Now, why do we care? Well, we care because errors are, in fact, inevitable. We are the weak link. We are the human beings. Human beings, by definition, err. And because of that, we need to recognize that errors cannot be eliminated. It's just impossible to do that. A goal should not be to eliminate errors. It's impossible. But if we want to improve safety, what we can do is, one, try to prevent errors if that is indeed possible in certain circumstances, and it is. And secondly, we need to make the system more resilient to absorb the possibility of error. Again, error is inevitable. All of us make mistakes. We do it every day. But we have systems often in place that, in fact, will absorb the fact that an error occurs. No harm occurs. In these situations, particularly in healthcare, What we're trying to do is take into account the fact that error occurs and, in fact, then say, all right, we know it's going to occur. Let's make sure we have ways to stop it from reaching the patient. Now, complex systems within and outside of medicine have, in fact, reduced error. Now, aviation is the classic model. Back in the 70s, when most of you were either young and foolish or indeed not even in existence with apples in your parents' eyes, back then we had hijackings, we had accidents all the time, and it was like every day it seemed that there was some kind of report about this big, huge problem, aviation accidents, plane crashes all the time. And then in 1974, or 1973 actually, a very dramatic event occurred in the UK. A captain of at that time, BOAC airline was involved in an accident. And he thought in the traditional methodology of thinking that the ethic meant, his personal ethics meant that it was all his fault. And because of that, he went on the cross sections of Heathrow runways, took a .38 Magnum and blew his head off. And he said in his note, "It's all my fault. We can never be safe with a person like me on the earth." And that made everyone in the aviation community sit up and say, we must do something about this problem. And in 1974, thankfully, Charlie Billings and several other researchers and groups who represented everything from the aviation industry, engineering, philosophy, ethics, came together and said, it's not all about one person. It's about how our systems work, how we communicate. And in 1974, the Aviation Safety Reporting System was created. And in 30 years, and this is the 30-year anniversary of the ASRS, we went from hijackings and problems associated with accidents every day, again, seemingly, to now aviation is the safest way of travel, bar none. In fact, you would have to travel 300 years on 2 flights a day from O'Hare to Boston every day to actually have or be involved in an accident in aviation. That's tremendous, tremendous benefit, tremendous social resources coming together and improving how a complex system like aviation and transportation can improve. Well, aviation is our model. And in anesthesiology, in the Department of Anesthesia where I am, we also have done some of those things, but we are far, far, far away from what aviation discovered. So we really need to make sure we take the models of the complex systems from aviation and nuclear power and the military and apply them to medicine. Now, the key to the aviation success is systems analysis. How the system is in fact designed represents how in fact there are problems or not problems with performance within it. So if you're a surgeon, for example, and you have to do 15 cases in 3 hours in that kind of a scheduling system, you're going to be prone to error. If you are a student and you have to get 10 papers done because you waited to the very last moment, as usual, and you have to crank out those papers within one night, and let's say you are not allowed to have caffeine, you will have many, many errors in your particular papers, unless you're really good at it. And that, after 16 years of school, I got really good at it. Now, what's important is you have to do the system. You have to focus on the system, the outcomes of the system, not any individual. Further, you need to share. You need to share your experiences. Narrative is essential. Human beings work well with narrative. You know, you can have the best p is less than 0.01 statistical study on Earth. It's written in statisticese. Most people won't read it. They don't care. But in the aviation industry, what we've done is we use all narrative. We write stories. And stories are really effective because, and for a good reason, we can see ourselves in those stories. We can see that person could be me. And it's really important to do that. You need to share information. You need to share your experience. And that really will, in fact, improve how safety is actually promoted. Now, you therefore have to look at systems, outcomes, and performance and improve the resiliency. Again, error is inevitable. It's always going to happen. Get something in place to take into account the fact that error is going to occur. Never assume that error is not going to occur. It will. And therefore, we also need a culture of transparency and sharing. We need to be able to communicate with each other on equal terms without finger pointing, without saying, you are at fault, you're an idiot, you're the person who's the problem. Cannot do that. We are a team. Now, importantly, associated with all these particular concepts is that individual orientation, shame and blame of individuals, is totally antithetical to improving system safety, totally. You blame one person who's part of a very complex system for something, that doesn't work. That is not going to improve system safety. That's not going to improve anything. You blame the pilot for a problem associated with communications on the ground between air traffic control, ground control, clearance delivery. That's inappropriate. The pilot has no control over that, or the pilot is put into the position in which he or she has to do the act to try to get his or her part of the aviation system moving. That's all reliant on somebody else. That's all reliant on a group of people. That's inappropriate to blame that person, that last person who touches the yoke. Now, what's the theory? Systems theory, it's actually pretty basic, and this is put out by, or has been really well articulated by James Reason, a professor of psychology in the UK. We have a pyramid of systems, and at the sharp end, that's the interface between the doctor or the provider and the patient. And it's built on a pyramid of administration, processes, human resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whole bunch of stuff. Where that particular interface between provider and patient occurs is dependent upon the foundation, the pyramid on which those people actually stand. Now, further, the other part of this is at the sharp end, there's something called the Swiss cheese model. All aspects of healthcare have holes and barriers that let error through or stop it from actually reaching the next layer. And that's the idea of sometimes an error occurs but doesn't reach the patient because of some barrier to allowing that to go and harm the patient. Now, let's look at this in just kind of a graphic detail. On the blunt and sharp end model, this is the blunt end. Sharp end is where the patient and the physician act. Now, you can see that the real messy part of this is the blunt end, where all those administrations and processes and human resources and regulations, rules, laws, informal processes, procedures, communications, everything else. And you can see where that point is going to be dependent on how well the pyramid is built. So all the stuff underneath, whether it's rickety or whether it's really soundly put together in a nice tight fashion, is going to dictate where the MD and the patient, or the provider and the patient, actually interface. And it's really important to understand that looking at the top, you can see that where that top is going to be, where that MD and patient is going to be, really, really is dependent fundamentally on all these other processes. And so, again, to reemphasize, if in fact the bottom layers are a mess, then that top layer, wherever that MD is going to be, yeah, that person might be the best particular physician doing the best thing he or she can do. They're not going to be able to outperform everything underneath. So it's very important to understand that that particular system actually rests mostly not on the MD and the patient, but mostly on all this other stuff. Now, with regard to the Swiss cheese model, and here's my little mouse. This is my effort at animation. This took me hours to do. So as you can see, I use color, but the animation part was really cool. All right, now you can see, this is Swiss cheese, right? You see all these layers of activities, of the healthcare interface between the provider and the patient. And you can see there are error triggers. So something happens, an error occurs. But sometimes they're just blocked. Somebody catches their own mistake. So at that first level, we block the error. That never reaches the accident level, never reaches the patient. But there are holes in every level, holes in every area. And the reason that they're holes is they're usually systematic holes, latent failures. Those latent failures might be scheduling, having 15 operations to be done within 2 or 3 hours, or resources, not having enough money, not allocating enough resources to actually get adequate health care, adequately safe health care put into place. Now, note, though, that it's not just one thing that creates the problem. It's a combination of all these little holes. Each of these little holes, as you can see, isn't enough to actually create an accident. But it's the combination of all these. When all the holes of failure line up, that's when an accident occurs. So in fact, most of the time, when errors occur, because we're all human and it happens, we catch it. Somebody or something catches that error and stops it. So we have all these defenses. But the problem is when they all line up, that's when we have a problem, that's when you have patient injury. And the critical thing to note, although this is rather straightforward, I think, the critical thing to note is that little mouse, that each of these holes changes over time. and it's constantly changing. So every day somebody walks in, something might in fact change where that hole is located, which makes things so challenging. Because you could fix, if it's a static system, you fix one part of it, you think, okay, I've solved the problem, but you haven't. Because as soon as you do that, the little mouse goes in and changes something else. And therefore, you have to constantly understand error is always going to occur, so you constantly have to reevaluate, reevaluate, reevaluate. So this is the Swiss cheese kind of approach and thought of how systems work. Now, applying this is life at the sharp end, and this is just a typical example. You have a trigger. Pharmacy puts out the wrong drug. So your first defense, usually in drug administration, is the nurse. Now, what happens if there's a latent failure? What happens if there's tremendous understaffing? Now, in California, we have a huge problem with this, and across the country, we have a huge problem with this. There are not enough nurses. So nurses are now, on average, taking care of between 30 and 50 patients, which is totally inappropriate, on a general medicine floor. And they're juggling between 200 and 300 different drug administrations, some for the same patient, some for alternate patients, during this process of drug administration. And of course, the Joint Commission, which is the accreditation agent of hospitals, are saying you've got to have these drugs in place within this amount of time. So they also have a time pressure. So we have this tremendous understaffing problem. And that's just one example, but there are lots of examples of latent failures. So this poor nurse, he or she has all these drugs they've got to balance, different kinds of patients. They make a mistake. Now, we get to the next level. That mistake might get caught if, for example, we have barcoding. If we have barcoding, we know that we have a match between a certain patient's barcode and what's the appropriate drug for them. And each drug now has its own separate barcode. But we don't have that in place. We have no drug tracking at this particular facility. So because we don't have any drug tracking, which would have caught any problems with the first level, it penetrates that particular safety level. Now finally, we have another defense. We have another nurse who is actually on the floors, who may assist with the first nurse, or there's some redundancy, there's spot checks associated with drug administration. But remember, we have this big, huge latent failure there. We have no nurses. They're all working way over their capacity. They're all engaged in a huge amount of activities that, in fact, they shouldn't be doing. But because of resource constraints, that's a failure in the system. So what happens, we got the first defense, goes through that because latent failure of understaffing or additional requirements. Second defense, we don't have barcoding, we don't have drug tracking in place. Third defense, we have another nurse who usually might have caught that problem, doesn't catch it because of, again, real problems associated with resource allocations. Bingo, all the failure lines line up, and a patient is given the wrong drug. Now, even at that level, there might be a save. If the patient, him or herself, says, this doesn't look like what I usually get. But that's only if the patient is actually a partner in his or her health care, or actually is involved in his or her health care, and quite frankly, is actually somebody who is empowered to actually provide a partnership level input in their health care. And I would say that unfortunately in our system, and the patient usually is the last line of defense, we don't empower patients. Indeed, think about it yourself. How many of you would go to your provider and say, you know what, there's something wrong here. There's an error associated with this. How many of you feel comfortable doing that? How many of you feel comfortable when you go to In-N-Out, well, In-N-Out doesn't make mistakes, but let's say McDonald's makes a mistake with your order. You have no problem telling the McDonald's person, you know what, 2 all-beef patties, that's what I want. Not this thing called chicken McNuggets. I don't want that. That's not what I want. But I'll bet you most of you feel uncomfortable correcting a physician, correcting a nurse, correcting a hospital person because you're not empowered. They make the culture so uncomfortable for you to speak up that you don't. And this is particularly true for disenfranchised patients. Patients who are minorities, who are underserved, who don't have insurance. It's a huge problem. And we don't do a good job in making sure those patients feel comfortable in doing the thing they should be doing, watching out for themselves. Amazing, but it's true. So accident occurs. All these latent failures are in place. Now, I should note, that first nurse, that second nurse, that pharmacist, those are good people. Those are people who care. They're people who care about you. They care about their professional standing. They feel that they are in this particular profession because they want to do good. They're trying to do good. But you can never outperform the system in which you're trapped. Never. And that's the system they're trapped in. Now, what could have happened? Well, if in fact we had talked about this kind of an error and we knew about it and people had actually said, you know what, there's this real problem, we had this error. Luckily, let's say the patient caught it. Patient informs the physician, informs the nurses, informs the hospital administration. Everyone gets together and says, you know what, there's a real systems problem here. Let's make sure that we always have redundancy, that one nurse is not overloaded. Always have somebody in the system who's separately hired to check medication orders. Let's have that done. This is just an oversimplified example, but if we did that, what would happen? Okay, we will have distracted nurses. Error always occurs. We know that, even under less problems with resource constraint. We don't have barcoding. That costs $2 million. We don't have that kind of money. But we have this other nurse, and she or he is not distracted. And she or he knows that their primary job is to check for medication errors. That hole closes. And we learn from the error. We learn, yeah, we got to take it into account. Well, we close that hole. We're not having understaffing anymore, or we've altered the staffing, and now we've got a barrier. And now this person is safe. That patient is safe. And this is a success story. Last layer save, a last layer success story. It worked. And we should tell everyone in the world about this because it works. And it does actually improve the health care for the patients that we're taking care of. Now, what are the important consequences of these models? First, it's really important. Last person to touch the patient can't take all the credit nor all the blame. He or she ain't the whole pyramid and ain't the whole thing of cheese. All right? That's just patently simple. Now, it is the height of arrogance when physicians say, it's all about me. I cured that patient. Baloney, you didn't cure that patient. You had the help of nurses, you had the help of administration, and don't forget, you had the help of the patient. So the arrogance associated with it's all about me also should not apply to situations where if it's a problem, it's all about me. It doesn't work to blow your brains out at Heathrow Airport in the cross of the 2 runways saying it's all about me. That doesn't improve anything. It's the system. It's the system that counts, and that's what you have to focus on. Further, don't kill the messenger. You have to know about these things. Things have to be transparent so you actually can figure this stuff out. You have to reward people for actually coming forward and say, there's a problem, and here's the problem, and here was the error, or here's the system weakness, and here's the issue. Let's do something about it. In addition, as I mentioned, last layer injury preventions, those are success stories. Those are not horrible things. Those are great. And in business, we've recognized this stuff for so long, and we have not in medicine. In business, they say, this is great. We're going to publish this. We're going to tell everyone in the world that we are really good at the last layer. We had the smarts to put that last layer into place. And it saved whatever the process is. And in medicine, that means we save the patient. So importantly, we need to know how the institutional pyramid is built, how it affects the sharp end, which means we need reporting, and we need to know where the holes are in each layer. Again, we need people to report. We need those sharp end people to report. Now, that's great. And as the kind of guru of patient safety says, okay, we know all the tools that we need to use to improve safety. How come we're not doing it? Well, what will the law say? The law says that we as lawyers understand that all you providers out there, you doctors, you nurses, you guys are careless. You don't care about the patients. You just want to make a lot of money. And we are the only people, we as the legal system are the only people that protects patients from harm. We are the ones that actually are the saviors of the patient and patient safety. Now let's just examine that a bit and talk about the legal system. Well, first, legal system, they attempt to provide incentives for safe health care by punishment, using the rules of malpractice, i.e. negligence. Something happens, we sue you, and then subsequently, you won't do it again. That's the idea. That's the whole concept behind negligence. The basic ethic of negligence is, hey, individual behavior control leads to individual harm, and therefore liability should attach on this linear model. Harm occurs, what's the step right before then? That person is on the hook. That's how the legal system works. Very individual orientation. Well, the problem with that is in healthcare, it ain't so simple. We have a tremendously complex system. Remember the pyramid. Remember the Swiss cheese. Professionals in the healthcare arena aren't just at the sharp end. They're all throughout it. So you nail one particular person, that's not going to help the system. Further, there's no truth in law. And I can tell you that because I am really good at I can make any argument for anything, anyway. Just let me know what you want. If you're the client paying me, I mean, I don't have clients, thankfully, or maybe not so thankfully, but I can make anything come out the way I want it to, by twisting words, by tweaking words, by making certain aspects of terms emphasized and certain aspects not. That's the rule of the game. That's how law works. It's called zealous advocacy. You have to allow each side to use all the tools at their disposal to try to win, because it's all about winning in the law. One side wins, which means another side loses. And that's how the legal system works. That's how we as a culture have adopted this idea of civil law, which is very ironic. Civil law has nothing to do with being polite. All right, now what does it end up happening? What ends up happening is everyone knows that you can't let any information go out that might be used against you. So the philosophy is the standard: shut up and fight. That's how we work the legal system. You never communicate at all. And the real problem and the real tragedy associated with this is, guess what? If you have the shut up and fight philosophy, the doc never talks to the patient again. And that relationship might have been in place for 20 years, in some cases 30 years, some cases 40 years, but because of an error, they never talk again. And of course, that's not just a tragedy with respect to a fine relationship being thwarted, but also it's a problem for patients because they might have chronic disease that they've worked with this one provider for so many years, for decades. And now they've got to go to somebody else. And if they got to go to somebody else, there are tremendous problems associated with the care and continuity. And I could tell you, and all of you who are physicians here know it, you might have an ICU patient you've been taking care of for 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 weeks. They got volumes 1 through 16 in their chart. And what happens when you transfer that patient? You provide a one-page summary. That's not going to get all the details that are necessary for that other provider. And it's certainly not going to get anything associated with the social and emotional concerns of that patient. Now, legal system perseveres on the last person to touch the patient. And I think I've hopefully been able to convince you that they are not the only people involved. And unfortunately as well, the legal system doesn't do a good job in getting these conflicts resolved. It takes on the average of 4 to 10 years for a patient to ever collect a dime. And if you read some of the work on the Harvard Medical Practice Study, you'll see that they estimate between 1 in 16 and 1 in 70 patients who are quote-unquote negligently injured, whatever that means, ever collect a dime from the system. And that's a vast overestimate. I think anybody who's ever been a provider knows that it's between 1 in 700 and 1 in 70,000 person who ever has an injury ever gets a penny from the system. And let's talk about justice for a moment. Justice to a lawyer, a trial lawyer, means that damages have to be at least $200,000 for a lawyer to take a case. So if you merely have a damage of $100,000, you're on your own. I can't take your case because it doesn't make enough money for me. I can't justify it on a cost-benefit basis, so I'm not going to do it. That, to me, is probably one of the most immoral things that we have in our legal system today, that justice is only afforded by those who are severely injured, who deserve it, or those who have money to pay, and that is ridiculous. But, so we have a real problem. Now, what are the results of this shame and blame paradigm? Well, first, we're not going to get frank and accurate discussions about error. We're not going to get information about system weakness. We're not going to be able to unearth systems information in a timely manner. Remember, 4 to 10 years, and that's an underestimate. I mean, we have cases that, I mean, I've reviewed about 300 tort cases in Santa Monica in LA County, and many of those cases were greater than 10 years. In fact, some of the cases, patients had already died. Further, limits of lessons learned. Can't, and we don't disseminate this information across providers. Remember, shut up and fight. We're not going to tell anyone about this. Further, we create an environment of distrust. Patient, provider, legal system, total distrust amongst each of these members. As well, it's deadly for the patient because that same problem, that same system weakness, that same rickety structure that the patient and provider are standing on continues, stays in place. And the longer it stays in place, the higher the possibility that some other provider, the next patient in that position, they're going to get harmed. The same result is going to occur. And one other thing, it's very expensive to bring a med-mal suit. So again, few patients are compensated. Real big problem. So when the legal system and the trial lawyers and the other folks who are telling you, and that's not to say accountability doesn't occur in some of the legal system, it does. But in this particular aspect, when those folks say to you, it's all about you terrible providers out there. It's all about you careless nurses and you heartless administrators who are just trying to cut corners. That's all it's all about. Think again, because it may not be. Now, the docs will say, and at this point, you know, if I've given this little part of the talk to the docs, they all applaud. And they always say, yeah, you know, it's all those lawyers' fault. We in medicine, we didn't have these damn lawyers there. We'd get this done. We can get stuff done perfectly. With, you know, these lawyers, you know, we have the right way of doing things. It's just these damn lawyers. Well, let's think about that for a moment. The medical paradigm. Well, what is the medical paradigm? The traditional medical ethics paradigm is the gentlemanly honor paradigm. And it's very aptly put that way by Virginia Sharp, who used to be at Hastings and now is in D.C. And there's a couple things I just want to know. First, what does error mean to the gentlemanly honor paradigm? Well, it represents a moral and ethical failure on your part. As I was told when I was in med school, if you make a mistake, you don't deserve to treat patients. You're immoral. You're unethical. You clearly didn't do enough reading. That was the other issue. Now, notice as well, gentlemanly honor is very appropriate because most of the people who believe this are the folks who trained in traditional systems, who believed in usually the male-dominated system, who believe that the only way to do the right thing by the patient is be the gentleman physician. Think of that model. Further, last person to touch the patient, sounds familiar, right? Last person to touch the patient, you're at fault. And that's what morbidity and mortality conference is all about. You are the last person to touch the patient in a bad outcome, your post-call, tough. Get up in front of all of us and let us, who have all had between 6 and 8 hours of sleep, and the curve goes linear, the older you are, the more sleep you've gotten. In that situation, we're going to pepper you with questions, and we're going to humiliate you. I remember after a particular event in Roosevelt Hospital in New York, where I was just a poor medical student, I got pulled up post-call in front of an M&M conference associated with an OB case, obstetrics case. There was a problem with a particular type of surgery. And this one attending said to me, you know, give me the top 20 differential diagnoses of sneezing and give it to me in order of incidence. And this was not seen to be humiliating or obnoxious or anything else. It was just part of the culture. Hey, you made a mistake. You better get ahead. You got to take your licking. That was the whole idea about how am I going to improve myself as a provider. The best thing to do is make it so painful emotionally that you'll never, ever make a mistake. Now, what does that really mean? Well, it really means that we're not trying to be perfect, or that may be the culture, but instead, we want to admit to a mistake because we don't want to go through that. Any sane person wouldn't want to go through that. And it's easy to do because what we do is we hide it. We just hide the mistake. I don't know what happened. I don't know. I came in and the patient was like that. You know, as they put it, chitlins on the bedside sometimes, and the wound dehisces and the intestines spill out. They call it chitlins on the bedside. Oh, you know, chitlins are on the bedside already. I had no clue that this was happening. That's what you do. You avoid it. Because, again, You're a sane person. You don't want to go through and get roasted up at M&M again. And even worse, if in fact we hide the error and then it gets discovered and a lawsuit happens, it's a mess. Everyone points fingers at everybody else. Not my fault, not my fault, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. It was that person, or this person, or whoever. And no system information ever comes out of it. And what happens is we lie. Well, not we literally, but we figuratively lie. We tweak the circumstances so that it looks like it really wasn't our fault, in quotes. Or no one can accuse us that it was our fault, or no one can justify it as our fault. So the information gets tremendously distorted, and no one really knows what happens. The pathway of care, instead of a straight line or a somewhat curved line that we can try to follow, becomes a zigzag of all noise and no direct information. So what's the result of this? Well, inhibits frank and accurate discussions about error and system weakness. Culture, it fails to honor systems information in a timely way. Limits the lessons learned, no dissemination across providers. It's starting to sound familiar. Creates an environment of distrust among the patient, the provider, and the legal system. Maintains and creates a deadly delivery environment for the patient. And one more thing, since error is hidden, few patients are compensated. You know what? Docs and lawyers have a lot in common. They actually have all the stuff that they accuse each other of having in common. And in this little professional battle that we have, and if you are in a room with doctors and lawyers, they talk around each other, above each other, past each other, not ever with each other. And this whole process, system limps along. Providers still get put in positions of error-prone situations, like as we saw, the rickety pyramid. Patients continue to be injured. Now, that's outrageous. Professional paradigms are supposed to look to society benefit, to define their own roles in that society. Systems paradigm is the way to do it. If healthcare is going to actually improve quality and safety, you've got to think about outcomes on the systems level, as aviation, nuclear power, and the military have done. All stakeholders, the healthcare team, have to be engaged and understand they have both rights and obligations. The current fashion is that providers have only obligations and patients have only rights. That is ridiculous. With rights always come obligations, and we need to recognize that. What are the obligations? Well, all members of the team, and we are all members of the team. We have an obligation to assist in improving the system. Providers, we have an obligation to have appropriate medical knowledge, to be part of the system's processes of care, and improve outcomes in an acceptable way to reach the goals for the patient, as defined by them. Patients have an obligation. They have an obligation to maintain and communicate accurate information. They have to be part of the system's approach. And they have to, in fact, be part of the improvement process that allows the entire system to help them fulfill their healthcare goals. Now, what are the rights? Well, all of us have the right to point out, discuss openly and honestly, without a lot of dissing from the providers, the problems with the system. We have a right to have no barriers to talk to our providers, to the people who are taking care of us, and the administrators and everyone else, as a member of the team, an equal member, what are the problems? And how can we improve those problems? We have the right to engage in our assessment, improvement of the process accidents, part of which we're a part. We have a right to do this. We have a right to be part of the solution because we are the ones who are affected by this. And if a problem occurs, we have a right to vent, communicate our perspectives with regard to the error, participate in corrective action, which is critical. We have a right to that. That will help us, if we are injured, catharsis, to make us feel that, in fact, what we've engaged and how we've been harmed actually means something. And obtain compensation quickly, not 4 to 10 years, not being subjected to a lot of depositions and a lot of humiliating questions about our past lives. You know, did you do this? Have you had sex before with these particular individuals? Does your sexual activities now, are they affected? Because that's a huge issue in damages associated with tort claims. And it happens to everyone, and I can tell you, having looked at 300 of these claims and watching these depositions, humiliating 78-year-old lady having to answer questions like that, that in itself is enough to say, you know, we got to change the system. Now, we cannot assume error-free human action. In all of this, we have to realize errors are going to occur. So it's our job and our imperative to make sure we do something so that, in fact, taking that into account, we stop it from harming. And we have to have a full expectation of systems accountability and systems improvement by all of us. Again, we as patients are entitled to have a voice in our healthcare. In fact, we should be the primary voice. We should not be told by providers that go in your corner, shut up, and take the treatment that we're giving you. That is inappropriate, and we need to be much more part of the system of improvement. Now, operationally, of course, in these situations, law and medicine gotta, in fact, be educated in systems principles. Have to be. Antiquated linear approach to this idea of accountability is wrong for healthcare. It's wrong for complex systems. We have to, instead of shut up and fight, you got to create incentives to have communications of system problems, system weakness. You have to create incentives to collect, analyze, and share this information without fear of punishment. Right now, if you're a provider, you do a root cause analysis of a particular problem, and then you go across the street to a hospital and say, you know what, we had this real bad problem. Let me show you how we fixed it. Let me show you how we changed this. That information loses any privilege that it could have had as a safety improvement or quality improvement activity, and now it's discoverable to the world, and it can be used against you in a court. So the legal system really, really creates incentives not to discuss things, not to go through. And I have been spending a lot of my time down at the VA trying to create systems that will, using legal machinations, to allow us to share information. Now, legislation like the Patient Safety Quality Improvement Act, Senate 720, that was a bill that was introduced last year. This would help a lot. This was a bill that would actually define patient safety as an activity that, in fact, could be shared, information could be shared across providers, could be used to actually improve safety across entities and within entities, and could not be used for its unintended use, which is to support lawsuits. It could only be used for safety. Unfortunately, last year was an election year. It passed both houses, and I was fortunate enough to testify in support of this bill, and it got to conference committee. But because of the election, nothing got done, didn't even get looked at. So now we're back to square one, and we don't know what's going to happen at this point. But this kind of safety legislation would be very helpful. And regardless of this safety legislation, regardless of what kinds of systems that we have in place or the laws of the state we're in, tough, we got to do it. Ethically, we're mandated to. We have to. We're really, truly professionals who our social roles are defined by the society around us. We need to do this. Now, patients, too, have to be educated about this because patients are the key. They have to engage in true partnership. And this has been done in other places, actually create a patient-provider partnership agreement. Every time a patient goes to one hospital, patient signs this kind of agreement. Medicare care is complex and sometimes complicated. We believe that patients are an equal partner in the delivery of care and essential for improving the healthcare system. We will do everything we can to provide safe and effective care to you. As our partner, please ask any questions you have about your care. Please feel free to suggest safety improvements, and please let us know if you see any eyebrow-raising events. Eyebrow-raising, this is great terminology. Situations. We want to use this information to improve how we treat you and all patients. Let's work together to make the best healthcare system for everyone. Thanks for your help and participation. Now, this is not just a form that's stuck in front of a patient. In this situation, both the patient and the provider sign it. And this is not just a symbolic act. This is an act to show a commitment to the partnership and an act to show a commitment to the understanding that we all are responsible for improving the healthcare system around us. And it also signals to the patient and to the provider we want to communicate, and we welcome the communication. And that's what it's all about with regard to safety. Now, of course, roles will change. First, I should mention, care delivery doesn't occur in a vacuum. If you're debilitated, we do not expect people to participate in that role. They can't. But able patients and family members will be and are the key. Doctors, we're doctors or nurses, we see this much of the healthcare spectrum. Patients see it all. And therefore, they are much better at providing information about the healthcare system than we are. So we need to listen to them and use them as the resource they are. All members of the healthcare enterprise, including providers and administrators, have expanded roles. We have to identify system weaknesses, whoever we are, and we have to be current. We have to know what the right tools are to do so. Our ethical boundaries are now expanded. We are now responsible for much more than we were before. We can't be passive. Now, sometimes individuals will be the subject of corrective action. But in this situation, there's a system improvement as the focus and goal, and we're not trying to punish. We're just trying to improve the system. So overall, systems focus, open communications, partnership, those are the keys. Systems approach, we have to use that to address the complex system we call healthcare. Individual-oriented shame and blame doesn't work. I don't care if it's in law or medicine, neither work. Systems ethics empowers the healthcare stakeholders, all of us, to influence the system for the positive. And finally, the systems ethics can, in fact, improve care. And this is not just a theoretical thing. Your life, your children's life, and your children's children's life all depend upon it. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Liang. And those of you who have questions lingering in your mind, come ahead and talk to Dr. Liang. Otherwise, have a nice day.